So welcome to our show this week. We are looking at the human element. My name is Karen Judd Smith, and we have with us Marilyn. You want to introduce yourself?
Marilyn Morris, out on the West Coast in California.
So we're here again today to do a little bit of back and forth. We've looked during the first couple of weeks of this human element show. What we've been looking at are the three brains. And so we go into that, what they are, why we're hardwired with those three brains, so to speak. That's what we did in the last couple of weeks. This week, what we want to do is look at the so what. So what that we've got three brains? What kind of relevance does it have to our daily lives? Is it important that we understand that we do have these 2/3 of our brain that are fast and 1/3 that is slow? 2/3 that operate primarily pre-rationally and below the horizon of our language and our logical thinking, and 1/3 that is what we think about us, how we think, what we're aware of. So looking at or endeavoring, what we want to look at today is what relevance does this piece of information, does this perspective on our humanity have to daily life, to our relationships, to our communities, to whether we are fighting or cooperating, to our political environs and what's going on today in the world, to even war and peace. Boy, we got big quickly. But anyways, the main thing that we want to be looking at today is to say, look, okay, so we've got three brains, so what?
Karen, I think the so what is absolutely critical. As we look in the past 2 or 3 major elections since maybe 2008. So that's a few more elections than 3, but the political, what I call political toxicity, has just increased to the point where families are divided like they've never been divided before. Using the mass, family members won't talk to other family members on Facebook anymore.
Yeah.
They don't share information about the nephews and nieces. I mean, it's just come down to these in interpersonal friendships, and right. So the constant use of the fast and slow, the understanding that advertisers have, that news outlets have, mass media has, Twitter, Facebook, Fox News, CNN, all of them have an understanding that if you can alarm, the survival brain, and then ignite the kind of the emotional brain, you'll activate people to do things, buy stuff, vote for so and so.
Yeah.
And so there's an intentional, purposeful, a type of hijacking of our survival instincts and our emotional impetus, so that we'll not only be alarmed, but we'll be angered, or we'll be excited, or we'll go out and do this or do that, because we've been alerted and alarmed. If you don't, fear of losing out, that whole kind of thing. You only live once, and you might not have this item. And then, during the pandemic, how many people went out and bought a garage full of toilet paper?
Yeah,
it might have been necessary in some cases, but finally the stores had to respond. They made oodles of money at first, and then they didn't have anything on the shelves, and so they had to respond to that. But just saying that what happens, and the so what is that without our exercise the cognitive area, think this through. Is what they just said fake news. I mean, we have to sift and sort out things now that we didn't maybe have to do when, 10, 20 years ago. But now we have to begin to develop more muscle power up front here to counter what's being constantly stimulated in every area, our instincts and our emotions.
Yeah.
And so we need to develop skill sets that'll help this part of our brain, our cognitive, slower thinking, rational part of the brain. Because if these parts of the brain, the instinctive and the emotional parts are activated, then you can put any reason up here and people go, that's why I have to get a gun. That's why, and there'll be an explanation, but it doesn't necessarily make good sense. It fits with the feelings, it fits with the instincts, but it doesn't necessarily make good sense for me as a person or society as a whole.
Right, because
that needs to be addressed.
The fundamental assumption, at least that I work with, is that we do have these three. These three elements is just simply an observation of who and what we are as human beings. And there is an optimal way for all these three to engage. I mean, it's just like we can walk any old which way, but some ways are bad for our health and some ways are good for our health. I mean, there are healthier or there are multiple ways of doing almost anything. But the way we can utilize the fact of who we are as human beings is to put all three into a kind of balance, to utilize all three well, not just to know that we've got them, but then to say, okay, well, I've got those three aspects. My fast systems, my lizard brain and my limbic brain, L1 and L2, they're there and they fire, up like crazy before I even get to thinking about what it is that I'm doing. How fantastic is that? Well, it's fantastic so long as we don't have a complicated life at all. It's fantastic so long as what I do really doesn't matter to other people. We have, a survival component, and it's absolutely phenomenal. Our pre-rational systems in us are absolutely, I love, they're mind-blowing what they do and what they accomplish. But where they become our enemy, which we kind of alluded to in the first, in our first talking, is our brains or who we are. Are we making ourselves, are we a friend or are we a foe? What do we have the capacity within us to operate well or to actually, shoot ourselves in the foot? And oftentimes we do the latter. We shoot ourselves in the foot because we don't know the fundamentals of how to get these three parts of who we are. It doesn't matter how much I like it or not. I've got a lizard brain. I have also got a social emotional brain, and I've got a logical brain. Now, how well I use all of them, that's totally up to me, my character, my life, my circumstances, But, each human being walks around the planet with all of these. How well do we use them, and what are we activating, and what are we doing? So I was actually thinking the other day that when somebody else stimulates or takes advantage of my native can't help it ability of my amygdala to fire and for me to go into fight flight mode, when somebody else intentionally does that, morally and ethically, what is that? It occurred to me, and I don't mean at all to diminish the issue of sexual harassment and sexual whatever. But it occurred to me there was a kind of a parallel to that. When other people abuse for their own purposes the way I function, that's pretty ugly behavior in a way. So it's not, poking the amygdala, poking our survival part of our brain intentionally for their own purposes is kind of an ugly behavior. We call it bullying when it's being done in the schoolyard. We accept it from marketers when they put in front of you the fear that you're going to lose out. If you don't buy it today at this price, you're at least going to lose out on that price, even if you don't necessarily lose out on the goods, especially when so many of them are digital these days. You can't exactly run out of digital goods. But anyway, that's just, they still will say, well, you can run out of getting this thing at this price. Now, that's a very mild version. It's, that's maybe more like flirting in the bar. But the point there is, both of those approaches and issues, they're making use of existing realities of the human being, for better or for worse. And not always for richer, for poorer, or for better in health. It's for their own intent and purpose at the time. Anyway, so that was just my line of thought that got me then to looking at what are we really doing in the political environment today that is using and abusing the reality of the human being, that we do have a survival brain, that we do have a social, emotional, reactive, the part of us. And how abusive is that? How abusive is that? Is that what we want our politics to be? And then the next thought was then how do we deal with that? How do we notice it? How do we build awareness? How do we fend it off? What is it that we can do, noticing that is taking place? And so that I started to play with these ideas and came up with an article about the political stoking of fear and anxiety, and do they hijack the amygdala? But I just want to share one thing, and then I know, Marilyn, you can jump into this about this topic. But I want to even share with you. I just did a search, and this was literally just a day or so ago. Let me see, where is it? I think this is it. I did a search for fear-based campaigning and what to do about it. I was thinking about being positive about it, about thinking, well, what can we do? I was just curious about seeing what was out there. And lo and behold, the top result was, here are some suggestions for how to make your fear-based campaign more effective. And I thought, good God, it's not about how to address it, how to deal with it, how to counter it, how to, protect ourselves, protect our children from it, protect our society from it. It was how to make it more effective. And to realize that, and then there's statistics, how fear-based campaigning is affecting American voters. And then it goes on and on and on. A powerful motivator in elections, fear. Now, I know that this is not new, but it grabbed my attention. The simple fact of recognizing that the top searches produced not how to contend with it. And I didn't go through and find out whether or not there were ways that are being promoted to contend with it. But it was all about how to use it. So no wonder we're in these agitated states of fear and anxiety, because it's intentionally being done everywhere. As Marilyn will say, there's millions being poured into those approaches. Anyway, sorry, I
Billions.
my little soapbox, but I just wanted
Billions.
to allow
Billions, yeah.
How we ended up at part of this conversation, and to see that that there is relevance to understanding, and how fundamental it's important for us to understand that we do have these three brains. We are hardwired like this. This is our human reality. The question is, what are we going to do about it?
Yeah. And I think that's on the larger scale, and
yeah,
billions are being poured into these fear-based campaigns for whatever political interest is behind that. But on the not lesser, but smaller scales where we work and at home, we're also under constant assault. At work now, if we work in a corporation, we're from time to time reminded that this is an at-will state, and we can be fired for any purpose or reason. Doesn't even have to be performance related. It can just be, well, we're downsizing. See ya. And so there is that kind of atmosphere for many people at work, and the millennials are beginning to experience in their young years, their mid-30s to late 30s, absolute burnout. Some of them can't even go into work anymore, and they got a chance to breathe during the pandemic, and they're like, we don't want to go back to that, where I'm constantly kind of pushed and pressured and that kind of atmosphere, and so it's hitting us at every level. And that building then some kind of agility around that, some kind of mental capacity to handle that assault on our social, emotional, and also instinctive area of our brain, and to put together, kind of a daily practice would be so helpful for millions of folks, maybe even billions of folks, but for all those folks out there who are suffering this kind of constant, daily, subtle, and sometimes not so subtle assaults, to be alarmed and to have some kind of emotional fear or anger or frustration or whatever, but to be aroused almost constantly. And so one of the things that I know you've been working on for at least this past decade, and before that, prior to that, in an environment like the United Nations, good Lord, talk about things that'll make you afraid or angry. You're going to find it there in the discussions in the hallways and in the speeches and all of that, because have all the nation's ambassadors issues that are of world level import and impact, and I just want to bring up then the concept of building emotional fitness,
right?
And the word that's been used in the corporate world mostly for, well, how can we make changes but keep things the same without taking down the whole corporation? How can we make changes in our structure? And then bringing that word into the more popular vernacular and being able to use it as individuals. And that's the word transilience, which is a portmanteau, a combination of the two words transformative and resilience. And we need both of them to stay afloat in this day of constant assault on our three brain senses. So Karen, you might want to, since you have a website devoted to this and coursework devoted to it, and you've trained folks in leadership positions about it, I'll just hand it back over to you. And later I can maybe explain how it helped me on personal level for those who are listening and wanting to get that personal side of it. But as the innovator of the program around Transilience, the emotional life fitness. Go ahead and
well, I guess
us.
You just mentioned emotional life fitness. I guess there's always this impish side of me. I guess it was about 10, 11 years ago, when I was starting to dig into this. And the reasons why I started to dig into this was because I had been through my own kind of life trauma that, it was to me. In the big picture, it was nothing compared to the traumas that many people experience. But I lost my job, I lost my tribe, I lost anyway, for whatever reason, without going into the specifics of it, it was kind of a traumatic experience. Anybody going through even the loss of their job, especially, you go into work one day, you've been just recently given a raise, you go into work, you go into a call, and all of a sudden you discover that you're being told by the boss on the other end of this digital entity that you're now fired, and by the end of the conversation you've lost your access to all of your emails, your whatever it is. All of a sudden your life is turned upside down in a flash of a second. How many thousands of people does that happen to? Almost way too often, that we would like to think about. It's traumatic, even if it isn't quite as traumatic as it must be for those living through wars and other much more grave and grievous situations that I'm at least cognitively aware of, but haven't myself had to live through. But it was that kind of experience that got me looking for ways to understand what was going on and how could I deal with it. And what are better ways of, why didn't I see it coming? Why, what was I missing in the time? And, even what could then I do? So I was looking at that, and an important part of it is I realized part of what I wasn't good at was handling my emotions. I mean, yes, I could in negotiations when it was all very third party out, it was all very out there, and it was, there was always lots of tension or whatever. But when it wasn't dealing with me personally and I was doing my job, then I could do all of those things. But when it hit, and I was living in that moment, I realized that I had limitations, serious limitations in terms of how I dealt with my emotional life. So my fun was that I thought, well, a lot of people go to the gym, they build up their muscle for, their physical fitness. But actually what we also need is emotional fitness. So I built up things called ELF tracks and whatever it's called. ELF. I liked elves. I think that might have been around the time of what Lord of the Rings or something. And so elves were really a thing at the time, and elves were neat and cool. And so emotional life fitness was just something that it helped, even there, it helped me look at the concept of emotional intelligence as something that we need to work on consistently. Just like our muscles get weak when we don't exercise them. Our capacity for emotional strength, or whatever that might be, our emotional intelligence, if we don't use our brains, if we don't exercise our analytic capacities, if we don't utilize our language, whatever it is, we need to exercise those things. But so for our emotional life, and I realized it wasn't just that I didn't exercise it, I didn't know what exercises to do. How do you strengthen your emotional, life? What does that mean? Where do I begin? How do I find out how to do that? So it became a bit of a journey, but somehow I've spent a lot of time thinking about these kinds of things, which is why I've developed a number of tools to help people do some of these things. Because why did I develop them? Because I realized I needed help. I'm not sitting here. Do I use the tools perfectly? No. Am I the most fit emotionally? Ask my family. No. But am I making effort to do that strengthening? Am I in perfect health? No, but I'm working on it. And I know that there are things that I can do to improve myself, my health, my situation. And when I don't, then it's not only me that suffer, it's all the people around me. When I get sick, it's not just me who suffers, it's everybody else who's sick, that my life impacts. When I'm emotionally out of whack, it's not just my problem, it becomes the problem for other people around me. So anyway, I've begun to think about things this way, and that's why I've got a number of tools, and I've tried to make them simple and useful and doable. And we can get into, and I'm happy to share some of these with people, but that's for another time, another place. But the main point that I want to make here is we do have three brains. It is relevant to our life. And the question becomes not just, is this happening and how is it happening to us, but what is my response going to be? What can I do about it to protect myself, to strengthen myself, to help, how can I utilize that knowledge to make my relationships and connections better? So there's a lot of consequence for having three brains. And that consequence is not just personal. It plays out in our groups, in our families. It plays out in our teams. It plays out in our corporations. It plays out in our politics. It plays out at absolutely every level. So looking at these core elements is possibly, for as much as I just got off a call dealing with projects to potentially work on the ongoing issue of North-South Korea and whatever else, and those kinds of issues that are immensely complex and difficult ones. But to me, at the core of it, it comes down to the one set of things that we can do that can have the biggest impact for ourselves and for those we engage, is to build and strengthen our core capacities as human beings. And so I've distilled them down into a number of what I call TQ, or the Transilience Quotient, tools and resources. And I like to think of them as things that anybody can do, even if you don't understand the philosophy or the theory or the reasoning behind them. They're so simple that can be done, and they can immediately start to benefit us in our own life. And we've got ways of very, very simple ways, but even helping you assess and notice the improvements that you feel, even, in 20 minutes, whatever it might be. But anyway, so that's just a little bit of a blurb about that. But it did come down, part of the way I got into this was because I unfortunately did that, started to think about, well, the whole idea of the problems of the political stoking of fear and anxiety. It was a response to listening to somebody saying, well, we can see that fear and anxiety are such a big issue for today. And I contend that, as Marilyn does, we've known how to be afraid. We've known how to be anxious, even before social media, but social media just is a megaphone to what happens at the personal level. And then it becomes an echo chamber, and there are additional problems because of that. But it does come back to the fundamental issue that this is how we're wired. So what are we going to do about it?
Yeah, and so in the effort of building one's transilience, the ability to adapt and change and to make transformation in one's life as well as in others' lives, but at the same time maintaining a stability and being able to come back and let's do this again, and let's have another conversation. And like your work for 30 years in the United Nations, it wasn't just one conversation that was going to make the big difference. It was several small meetings sometimes in the hallway, or just, can have a few minutes of your time in your office, or this kind of thing. But it was, and then that would build into programs that did have lasting impact. And so the skill sets that you've put together over a long period of time, not just in response to the mishappenstance of getting a raise and then flip side, oh, but you're out. And there's a ton of millennials right now, thousands, tens of thousands, that they got raises consistently. They were making great money. And then somebody else came in charge of Twitter, and thousands of them are gone, and then Facebook and other, companies all across the world, downsized suddenly. And it wasn't about the lack of performance. It was just times are changing. So how we build a resilience through those kind of moments in our lives where the times are changing, or kids are leaving the house, or a divorce is occurring in your life, or you did get that fantastic promotion and now you find yourself, I wasn't ready to be a manager of 60 people. What am I going to do? So there is success, and there's stress on the opposite end of that, of changes. But I think the overall, the skill sets that you've put together, some of them are so good for just that short-term response, like when you just get something that's a surprise, and you just need to make a quick response. Others for that you can build over time, and you use them over time, and you come back to that skill set again and again.
And it's probably,
now I'm in another situation similar. Yeah.
And it's probably more importantly for the ongoing. We notice the need in those moments, in those heightened, challenging, dramatic moments. That's when we notice the need, because that's when it becomes apparent we don't have the skills to deal with that situation. But we didn't just lose our skills in that instant. We hadn't actually been building them over time. We didn't have them in the first place. It's just more obvious in that moment. Anyway, we're way over. We're already over time and need to give everybody a break. Thank you very much for being here, Marilyn. And I love these conversations. And part of this is how we have a little bit of fun together, sharing some of the things that we have the opportunity to talk about. And I know Marilyn has many stories that are highly pertinent about many of those critical and important moments in life, that when we know what to do, it can make such a huge difference to one's life and one's family, as she's dealt with a lot of, quite literally the end of life issues for many a person. And so she's come to see what is important, what are the challenges for people at that stage of life, and how important it is not to wait until then to do something about it. So that's what we hope to share more with you about as we look a little bit more into the human element in the coming days and weeks. Thank you very much, Marilyn. And thank you for being with us today. And we'll see you perhaps same time, same place next week.
I hope so.